Everyone could begin to take their seats. Well, hello, I am Michelle Alexander, and I just found out 2 minutes ago that I have the honor and privilege of introducing Rashad Robinson. If I had known a little sooner, I probably would have prepared a lengthy tribute to this man who I have come to deeply admire over the last 10 years or more now that we have had the opportunity to work together in various capacities and support one another's work. Rashad is what I would describe as a game changer. He is someone who is always looking strategically to find ways to change the conversation towards racial justice, towards justice for the least advantaged, for the marginalized, for the exploited and oppressed. And if you do not already know Rashad, let me tell you just a little bit about him. He is the president of Color of Change, a leading online racial justice organization. It is driven by more than 1.4 million members working to build political and cultural power for Black communities. Color of Change is creating a more human and less hostile world for all people in America. And if you are not already connected to Color of Change, I suggest you go online and get connected as soon as you can, since they are a very useful source of inspiration, information, and make it possible to mobilize quickly around pressing racial justice issues of our time. Color of Change uses an innovative combination of technology, research, media savvy, and local community engagement to build powerful movements and change industries that affect Black people's lives in Silicon Valley, Hollywood, Wall Street, Washington, prosecutors' offices, Capitol Hills, and city halls around the country. Notable victories for Color of Change include redefining the role of local prosecutors, working to reduce mass incarceration and police violence through changes in practice and policy, such as ending money bail, forcing over 100 corporations to pull out of the secretive right-wing policy shop ALEC following the murder of Trayvon Martin, successfully pressuring corporate leaders to abandon the Trump Business Council and stop enabling the growth of white nationalist groups through their services, framing and winning the federal protection of net neutrality as a key civil rights issue, changing hiring practices in Hollywood, as well as the representation of both race in the criminal justice system, working with Airbnb, Google, and Facebook to identify and implement policies for diversity in hiring, eliminate racist and inaccurate content from their platforms, and prevent predatory advertising, and forcing Pat Buchanan and Bill O'Reilly off the air. Previously, Rashad served as Senior Director of Media Programs at GLAAD, leading all of the organization's advocacy, strategic research, messaging, and large-scale media campaigns. Please welcome my friend Rashad Robinson.
So I feel like my day has been made. Michelle Alexander just introduced me. I can go and hit the gym, take a nap, and be done. So thank you all very much. It is such an honor to be here. Thank you all for coming to this discussion. This is a Saturday. You all, it's a beautiful day outside. You could be a lot of places. I want to thank Union for hosting us, for being such an incredible partner and a leader, and not just your words, but your ongoing action and continuing to create space and engagement. I have worked with and engaged with Union for over 15 years in various areas of my activism, and so appreciate all the ways that you live and engage the work. Thank you to Jose and Ryan and our incredible friends at Define American Our partnership, our ability to come together and bring our organizational resources to bear around these issues is so incredibly important. Ideas are important, but action is so critically important. And the ability for organizations to not just talk about common ground, but then to sort of move in affirmative action. Jose and I have been friends for a number of years, and there is nobody in the movement that I want to work with more on a regular basis, and am so proud of this partnership. And to my team at Color of Change, who always finds ways to make me look better than I actually am and support me in showing up in these ways. It is an honor to be here, and an honor to be here with all of you. So the story of criminal justice reform movement today is one of big fights and setbacks and new learnings and big breakthroughs. But it always wasn't that way. We did not always have the breakthroughs that we have now. I was just talking with Michelle before I came up here, and we were talking about, the early days, and the early days were 8, 9, 10 years ago, where we couldn't get anyone to pay attention. We couldn't get anyone to support financially. We couldn't get people to show up to events. What so much has changed about where we are at in this moment. But we could easily lose our edge. On the brink of major transformation, many movements just stop. They lose sight of what made them powerful and lose their way, or they are neutralized or outmaneuvered, or another front opens up that they are not prepared for. For instance, just as movements for decarceration starts to seriously challenge the status quo, we see another form of incarceration under the banner of detention take off exponentially. Today, detention targets and attacks migrant people, degrading and disregarding every principle of democracy, human rights, human needs, and human freedoms. And tomorrow, it could just as well, and it is already expanding into the new matrix of control, targeting political activists and anyone else the state wants to attack, going outside of the criminal court system and making any court system at all. I talk about immigrant detention as part of mass incarceration because it is. Unjust, irreparably destructive, family separation is an outcome of both. Racial profiling is a driver of both. Corporate profiteering is a driver of both. Laws that have nothing to do with safety or justice are at the root of both, as is the criminalization of personal hardship, corporate-caused poverty, and natural child development, and more. We are here today to talk about effective strategies for movement building, so that going forward, we make sure that we win more than we lose on every front in our fight for justice, from prisons to detention centers, from financial exploitation of our labor, from marginalized brands of Black people and the marginalized brands of immigrants. My friends, it is not inevitable that we will win. We are all here because we know we can win with the right strategies, if we keep learning together in the right ways. It's hard to do this work intellectually and emotionally, because the most important first step in a strategy conversation is knowing where you're at and knowing where you aren't. To celebrate the successes for a minute and then spend hours figuring out how to repeat it, expand it, defend it, and get where we are really trying to go. To accept that just by having the greatest analysis of the problem or the most inspiring vision for the future or the most compelling individual stories, it doesn't necessarily mean we are getting anywhere with them. To accept that the greater the number of our protests does not necessarily translate into the greater scale of our policy change. The more and more words we come up with does not necessarily translate into changing the narrative. We often win the moral high ground. That's a genuine comfort but a completely inadequate reality for those millions whose lives are ruined every single day by the reality, or even just the constant threat of their freedom being taken away by mass incarceration. We have to actually win the fight over power, not just the argument on paper, and we have to go a long way to building power we need to fight and to win. Looking at the success and the work and the sacrifices, we must see that when it comes to mass incarceration, including expansion of detention, it's hard but necessary to accept that our success is very much still in the Underground Railroad phase, not the emancipation phase. I want to talk about Alvin Kennard, whom we've heard about this year. At 22, he was incarcerated in Alabama for life under the Three Strikes Law. He took $50.75 from a bakery. He was just released after 36 years. I also want to talk about Geneva Cooley, too. At 59, she was incarcerated in Alabama for life under ridiculous drug laws. She was recently paroled at age 72. I won't talk about Wall Street corporations that steal and defraud consumers and taxpayers of billions with no accountability. I'm not going to spend my time talking about pharma corporations that often drive overdose deaths in this country at record highs with no accountability. I'm just going to talk about these two people, Alvin and Geneva. Because the stories around their cases say so much about where we are and how far we have to go. Are their cases the trend, a testament to our power? Or are they concessions, appeasement from a system that benefits from looking compassionate, introspective, even charitable every now and then, but is not fundamentally changing? One of the prosecutors involved in Alvin Kennard's case recently, who did not oppose the judge converting Alvin's sentencing to time served based on new sentencing guidelines, said that his office did not err in applying the law. He said that his office did not err in applying a law that sent Alvin Kennard to prison for 36 years for stealing $50. It's funny how applying the law against us when it comes to excessive punishment, but also how not applying the law works against us when it comes to accountability. What's the same is never the law itself, but the working against us part. People working against us, incentivized to work against us, and using the rules to do that however they can. And of course, nothing has been said about the hundreds of others in Alabama who are in the exact same position, who are all blocked by various barriers from getting the same kind of lawyers working that Alvin did. Geneva's lawyer said it well. What galls me is those who are getting any luck are getting it because we just happen to have the right combination of system actors, and not because there is a mechanism for making this work. The particular prosecutor in Alvin's case has a framed, embroidered Bible verse of Amos hanging on his wall. Let justice roll down like water, and righteousness like a mighty stream. Like everything in our world, people first know what they want to say, and then they find the material they see around them to help them say it. We call that sometimes taking things out of context. But actually, it's about putting things in context. It may be a different context in the original, a different story than the original, but that new story is usually more powerful than the original. So with that in mind, what is this statement doing hanging on an Alabama prosecutor's door? Someone with a Bible verse on their door is clearly on a mission driven by purpose. Well, who do you think is the flood? And who do you think is the flooded? The mentality of our system, the principles that govern it, still assume that the system is the flood, And it's there to drown our people out and bring us under control. It's about the purifying power of the justice system, the mentality that leads to cleansing a community of evil by cleansing a community of everyone who represents evil. And even though lots of people commit crimes, only the people who represent criminality in the deeper allegorical way should be punished for it. And so we're not truly punished unless we've been extremely punished, far more than helpful or deserved or righteous or in any way legitimate. Don't tell me the left is caught up in virtue signaling when our system of criminal sentencing is the largest, most bombastic apparatus of virtue signaling ever built in this country, and built on our backs. We face punishment of biblical proportions for a mission of biblical aspirations. Because the people with the power in the system are on a mission they think is noble and godly. They have made injustice, generation after generation, into a just and noble cause. And in that mission, their liberation is our captivity, and their purity is our punishment. And our story as a people, whether black people or immigrants or both, is really only ever about their story as a people. Even if we haven't committed any crime, we should still be punished, just for being who we are, for representing what we represent. That is the system we have today, which is not yet changing at any fundamental level and has not yet changed since the criminal justice system in this country began. This mentality has flooded our system. So when we talk about changing the story, narrative change, it's about the story we need to change. The big story behind the incentives, behind the behavior, and behind the signaling that continues to guide people in power, which they in turn continue to reinforce and propagate. We either need to take the prosecutor's sign down and replace it with another, or we need to re-educate everyone as to what that sign means and change the motivations of the people who are guided by it. This is how we get to the importance of narrative power, the mandate for changing the narrative. Because if we don't control the big story, who is the flooded and who is the flood? Who is the flood and who is the flooded? Who represents justice and who represents the injustice that needs to be controlled? Then we cannot win the changes that last. If we win a big policy change, has the underlying logic of that policy shifted? And have the incentives that allowed politicians or media to blame black people or immigrants or others shifted? If not, if we don't change those things, as soon as we hit the stock market downturn coming up, our gains could easily be undone. Whether by re-incarceration or e-incarceration, as Michelle Alexander has pointed out so well. In fact, we're facing e-incarceration, the highly profitable matrix of control that's growing through technology outside of prison walls, as a balancing force against a lot of what we're winning in terms of reform to reduce mass incarceration. Because the profitability of racism can never be underestimated, nor can the power of the people who benefit from it. And so in this moment, when we have some momentum, we have to go all the way. We have to change the underlying logic and the incentives that create and sustain a society with the deep instinct to punish people of color and women all the time, especially when there's uncertainty about the future of a city, a state, or a country. And we have to make the truth about crime and justice as we know it, and the truth about people of color and immigrants as we know it, and the truth about Christianity and all faiths as we know it, and define it and practice it and draw power from it. We have to take all of these truths that are being distorted and make them our truths, our values, the dominant truths and the dominant values. Even and especially as we tell our own stories of success. This pains me. The general news stories about Alvin Kennard and Geneva Cooley involve their own personal progress, not the self-reflection and progress of the system. And y'all, that's a really important sign about where we are at in this moment. The story invariably mentions how sorry they are, how much they've grown personally, and how they are reformed. What's the big story? Is that the system can reform them only because these criminals, have reformed and become worthy of release. The question of their freedom, the injustice they face, the deep hypocrisy of the system, that's not what requires reform. Shouldn't we be asking, is this system worthy of having any authority over people's lives at all? Because the track record of this system would lead to a strong verdict of no. If we're just working towards corrections, but not ultimately putting the system itself on trial, we will never end mass incarceration or detention. We know we're winning in some places when the focus of the story becomes different, because the values have changed, because we've made them change. For instance, when we have prosecutors that prosecute the injustices of the system first, and then or never the person who took $50, then we will know that our movement is the flood, and we have created a new era of justice. Geneva Cooley had to wait until a new district attorney won the local prosecutor's race. An election by the people replaced the incumbent who prosecuted her with the first African American to be elected as the county's top prosecutor. It's someone who has said that sentencing nonviolent offenders to life without parole is actual injustice. The new prosecutor, and this is incredibly important, the new prosecutor and every new prosecutor driving reform is a product of our movement, not the other way around. Driven by a new and different purpose, elected by a new type of political participation, and part of a new story that we have created, a new context that makes their very existence possible. So how does all of this work? We have catalyzed and worked to catalyze norm shifts, narrative change and culture change to some degree around bail. The news is different now. Reporters are reporting based on facts, assumptions, and attitudes that we worked tirelessly to even get heard just a few years ago. Many new prosecutors know that they cannot compromise on bail reform because the people who elected them have set a new mandate. Every Mother's Day and Father's Day, the movement of people out around the country has worked to build more power and energy, telling a new story about who's impacted by this system. Corporations know that they have to cut ties with the bail industry, whether forcing Google to stop advertising for them or making the bail bond industry and political contributions a toxic association for political leaders. All because we have taken a broad view of the many strategies in combination with what we need to win, working across all different forces to change the narrative and change the norms. We also see not just cultural influences, but cultural vehicles themselves, actual television shows that reach millions of people, starting to make drama out of the factual failures of the bail system and other areas of the criminal justice system, and no longer simply justifying the practice.
Racism is built into the DNA of America. And as long as we turn a blind eye to the pain of those suffering under its oppression, we will never escape those origins. The only safeguard people of color have is the right to a defense, and we won't even give them that. Which means that the promise of civil rights has never been fulfilled. Due to the failure of our justice system, our public defense system in particular, Jim Crow is alive and kicking. Laws that made it illegal for blacks and whites to be buried in the same cemetery. They categorize people into quadroons and octoroons. They punish a black person for seeking medical attention in a white hospital. Some may claim that slavery has ended, But tell that to the inmates who are kept in cages and told that they don't have any rights at all. People like my client Nathaniel Leahy and millions of people like him who are relegated to a subclass of human existence in our prisons. There is no alternative to justice in this case. There is no other option. To decide against my plaintiff is to choose lining the pockets of prison owners over providing basic defense for the people who live in them. And is that the America that this court really wants to live in? Where money is more important than humanity? Where criminality is confused with mental health? The Sixth Amendment was ratified in 1791. It's been 226 years since then. Let's finally guarantee its rights to all of our citizens.
Yes, sometimes in Hollywood, they can do things a lot better than we can. But this is a result of movement building. This is a result of the power that has been built, even the use of the word cages. On network TV in prime time for over 17 million people is a result of our ability to build power, change norms, and force the conversations and the stories on our terms. This piece of media right here puts the system on defense. But we also face a media that does the very opposite and continues to put our entire communities on defense at every turn. It is relentless, so we have to be relentless. We can't simply celebrate a clip like this unless we know that we have truly flooded the media landscape with these ideas. And we have started to see how these have changed the political realities and the possibilities on the ground. A lot of our work at Color of Change is working inside of writers' rooms at Hollywood, running campaigns against the things we want off, and then working inside of Hollywood to get the real stories, to work with writers, to advocate for the type of people inside of writers' rooms that can write storylines, to elevate and push for more creatives of color and folks who understand these stories to have the type of power, to recognize that we simply can't have conversations with ourselves, but in order to reach more people, we have to change the incentive structures inside the vehicles that actually reach people, recognizing that the stories in our barbershops and our beauty salons are way more important than the conversations in our offices and sometimes in our community gatherings. And also, it's about people. I think of this as the architect of narrative work, right? It's not an app that Silicon Valley created. It's not a TV screen. It's not a camera. It's people. Because we have to first put our ideas out through mass action, to break through public consciousness, to establish ourselves as both the people to be reckoned with, and even more importantly, as the people to create ideas to be taken seriously. And that is so critical. And that can't happen unless we focus first on the most critical narratives of all, those that motivate people to participate and create a base of people for whom decarceration becomes their #1 issue. What they show up for, what they take risk for, what they talk about, what they give money to, what they vote on. We have seen how narrative drives forward the idea of Black joy. For instance, we have brought people together for action, people not even involved in politics, who believed in change and wanted to be part of something. At Color of Change, we don't talk about Black joy as the absence of pain, but the presence of aspiration. Bringing people together in communities all around the country, not just to fight against what we are upset about, but to fight for what we believe in. Bringing people first into community and then to work on issues second. And the brunch strategy we've had around the country has gotten people mobilized and information around prosecutor elections, around bail reform, but recognizing that narrative change and narrative power always always starts with people. But once we break through and have introduced a powerful new set of ideas in the public, we have to pick up and work across every narrative channel to make good on the second critical narrative strategy, building the power to own public consciousness. Not the consensus of poll results, but the consensus of what actually drives decision making, the consensus decision makers feel materially accountable to. First, turning the momentum towards our side so that something that once made intuitive sense to people on balance, whether bail or mass incarceration, no longer makes sense at all. Making it actually anger the segment of the public who influences standards for society overall, making them feel unresolved and agitated if officials do not take up the cause and progress does not come in real time. We have to embed this in the hearts and minds of everyday people. Those channels are all reinforcing, for example, the news cycle and the entertainment cycle are all in constant relationship, and you can't rely on just one. But you can rely on one to change the other. Some of our work in this area is about forcing change in these areas, tracking the coverage, for instance, in New York City on crime and tracking how they talk about black suspects and then going back and comparing that to NYPD records and seeing that there's distortion rates across the board. Even after you look at problematic and racist policing, targeting policing, the reports that we've shown just here in this city showed a 40 to 70% distortion rate. And what I'm talking about here is that they overreported black crime and underreported white crime. Trying to change public policy in the context of people going home every single night and being told who to be afraid of, why we need more police, why police keep them safe. And that is why changing the narrative and changing the story is so incredibly important. When we produced this report, we went into the newsrooms in New York, and we brought this report, and the first thing they said to us is, "We're not racist." We're like, "Okay, we got you. And whatever you're doing on a daily basis is producing a racist result. So how are we going to fix that?" Because I'm not really interested in your feelings, I am interested in the results. And the results here are that time and time again, when choices are being made about what to cover and who to show, we are relying on old themes and old narratives. But that's what it takes to have true accountability for a movement. It's not just about feeding good ideas to executives and producers and editors. It's about forcing their hand, changing the rules to make sure that there is a line they can no longer cross in terms of misinformation and inaccurate portrayals of our people and our issues, and then setting a new standard for what they should be portraying. And it's not just about news. We're going to be releasing a study very soon on crime procedural shows on television. Later this month, we've worked with USC to look at over 200 episodes of television shows across 27 shows across the landscape. You know, the Law and Orders and the CSIs, the shows that have a criminal black and brown person each episode and a hero law enforcement figure. These shows that over and over again show the system to be working, wrap everything up in an episode. And then on awards night in Hollywood, we see self-righteous folks talking about Donald Trump when they have done more to create Trumpism than almost anyone else, creating a narrative that has allowed people to feel like the system is working and nothing should change, educating juries and voters and so much more about how the system works, having judges time in and time out having to turn to juries and say, "We know you watch CSI, but that's not actually how DNA evidence works." If we don't actually build power to force those hands, those executives will continue to do what they do best, create content that makes more money. We also have to get more of us into these writers' rooms, but the accountability has to come first. It can't just be about putting black faces in bad places and expecting things to change. Facebook misinformation is something we're also tackling, and from misinformation across the internet space. But traditional news and all these entertainment and television shows are no less influential than the news itself. It's going to take infrastructure to do it. The infrastructure both to defend our gains and the ability to push far beyond them, to scale them. The piece about public characters here is also critical. You know, I said it before, progressive prosecutors are a product of our movement, not the drivers of them. We now have a movement that has ushered in dozens of progressive prosecutors in counties and cities around the country, including those places that can model a standard for national audience and mainstream reinforcement. This is really another level of narrative change and shifting norms. It's obviously a policy lever as well, but having prosecutors doing the job fundamentally different than how they did it before sends a clear message about new rules and norms of society. Prosecutors have more influence than any single actor in the criminal justice system, and believe me, I think we need to change that as well. But in the process, it's also a major strategic choice to engage the prosecutor races and help shape the agenda for a new type of prosecutor, one that works for us and not against us, one that recognizes that we put them there and we can take them out. And as long as we maintain the power to actually keep them working for us and not compromised and co-opted, not left alone when they actually need our help from the outside to keep their agenda on track from the inside. DAs are telling us all the time exactly how they are under attack, and some of them are, and some of them actually need to be under attack. And we have to be honest about how fragile their power is and the role of our movement in continuing to overwhelm and oppose reform. They are symbols, which we have managed to strategically in place in order to make them vehicles for scaling our movement and embedding our values and our agenda in the government for lasting, transformative ways. It takes infrastructure to be part of an election cycle, converting community energy into electoral power, to make what's happening in prosecutor offices a symbol for how change is possible and what change is possible. And that means that we have to get serious about corporate power and corporate accountability, whether through the criminal justice system itself or through the media landscape that enables so many injustices. People don't experience issues, they experience life. The forces that hold people back are deeply interrelated. A racist criminal justice system requires a racist media culture to survive, sustain, and support. Political inequality goes hand in hand with economic inequality. There's change in corporate behavior, but there's also fighting against having our movement co-opted. Not letting corporations play games that corporations play in the narrative frame. We've seen the largest private prison corporation in the US change their name from CCA to Core Civic. We cannot underestimate, and this is important, y'all, we cannot underestimate how easy it is for people with power, when confronted with the threat of accountability, to simply run away. Run away from having laws, run away by having laws made to excuse them. Run away by moving their money out of reach. Run away by paying off organizations that are supposed to be movement organizations with ego strokes and temptations to access and the status of power. Maybe giving some of those organizations money, playing lip service to victories that are not really victories, because nothing has changed. Run away by taking on the banner of justice, selling t-shirts, saying the right things, trying to make media dollars and product dollars off the very movement trying to take them down. Run away by simply lying or changing their name, a kind of narrative change version of declaring bankruptcy, moral bankruptcy, allowing them to leave their identity behind and start over, even though nothing has changed. I want to end on a couple of notes. Because when I say narrative change, and the reason why I want to talk about narrative change and not come up and list a whole set of policies is because of where I believe we are at in this moment in terms of the Underground Railroad frame, and that we have to do so much work to change the context by which we are fighting if we are actually going to win the victories that propel us forward. We can say that narrative is important, but what does it mean? How does it work? Not just to make us competitive and fighting back, but to make us unstoppable and actually winning. What narratives are we talking about? Which narratives are most important to focus on? Those working against us or for us? Where does this whole narrative thing play out? In the news, in church, online, in the movies? How can we have a strategy working for all of us at once? What infrastructure does it take? I've tried to hit on some of these notes and the role of organizing and building a base in corporate power. But I want to end here. That it's not just about all of these things, but it's also about what we center and who we center. Racial justice in all of this work is not charity. And while it is certainly moral, it is not moral alone. Racial justice is strategy. Racial justice is the thing that we need to actually propel us forward. And not just racial justice, but ensuring that those who this system was set up to destroy are the people leading the efforts to end it. That we cannot build movements for ending mass incarceration that are not led by people of color, formerly incarcerated people, and the communities that are most attacked. And it's not about charity. It's not about doing the right thing because we feel good about it. All those things are important, but it is the most strategic choice because all of the ways that our movements get co-opted is because people have been centered that do not have the right things at stake. So when we are thinking about narrative, when we are thinking about how we make our truth, the truth, that is what we have to do. We are now in the 400th year of black folks, of Africans being brought to the shores of this country. At every turn, the choices to create servitude, to create systems to destroy, genocidal aspirations are all at play. But we are still here. We are still working, and we are still building. And our fight for a better future, our fight to build power, is about the infrastructure and the people that we put forward. It's about recognizing that the only way that we win is having a true vision for justice and empowering that by the energy, the passion of everyday people. This is not about an ideas gap. This is about a people gap. Our ability to build the type of movements that have enough people to overwhelm a system that at every turn has created a world meant to replicate itself over and over again. Our work is ahead of us, my friends. Our work to recognize the intersections between mass incarceration and mass detention. And our ability to win those things will not come with gimmicks, they will not come with shortcuts, and they will not happen without people. Our ability to make justice real relies on all of us. And it is our fight to win, and I believe we can win. Thank you. So I found out a little while ago that I think I'm supposed to take questions, which I didn't realize that was what I was supposed to do. But I'm ready to roll. And I'm gonna not be in front of the podium.
Hey, thanks for that wonderful speech. My name is Brandon Felton. Question for you that you probably get quite frequently in these settings. What can allies do to help?
So I always talk about the 3 Ds. We need doers, donors, and door openers. And so I'm going to first start with the doing, right? First, get involved with a local organization, a community organization that is connected and accountable to those most impacted. And give your time and your energy, be willing to show up, offer the things that you're good at and the areas where you can be of expertise. This movement needs donors. This movement needs resources. The incentive structures that we are trying to take down are fierce. And quite frankly, the gap between what we are trying to achieve and our aspirations and the resources in the bank are, there's a real gap. And so I would say start locally and think about local organizations that you can give to, that you can support, that you can drive resources to, that you can ask your friends and family to give to. That is incredibly important. And then we need door openers. We need people that are willing to put something on the line, that are willing to be inside of uncomfortable conversations. I don't need any more white allies showing up to my local organizing meetings. I need you showing up to your Thanksgiving tables. I need you showing up to your alumni associations. I need you showing up to talk to your family members and your friends and those folks. I need you making people uncomfortable in your own spaces, thereby making yourself uncomfortable. That's how we move from allyship to solidarity. That's how we move to actually getting ourselves to a place where I think more can be achieved and we can propel our work forward. Yes.
Hi, Rashad. Thank you so much for that. I work in philanthropy, and one of the things that I see is the effect of the way that the capital structure is for progressive work and how it forces people to brand their own work, and it really mitigates against working together for something bigger, because you're always competing to prove your impact in a very narrow way. And I wonder if you could just talk about how Color of Change sort of deals with that counterproductive pressure.
It's really hard. I would love to stand up here and say that we've got it figured out and that there are not all sorts of moments I look back on and be like, wow, I wish we'd have done that differently, or we are part of the matrix that we hope to disrupt. I want to say a little bit more about that, because I want to back up for one quick second. Far too often we see inequality as unfortunate, and it's framed that way, unfortunate, almost like a car accident, rather than unjust, right? And when inequality is framed as unfortunate, it's like, oh, this just happened. And then what ends up happening is charitable solutions to structural problems, right? We send water bottles to Flint's instead of cleaning up the pipes. We do service days at inner city schools instead of changing public education. We stop at reentry instead of changing mass incarceration. We work to help those people. We ask Alvin Kennard to talk about how sorry he is instead of putting the system on trial. And quite frankly, the capitalist structures that drive philanthropy are just as much a part of that as anything else. The fact that all of this money has been put in place and then we have to walk up the hill and ask for it in small increments, and folks get tax breaks to keep money off of the public rolls. That NFL football owners can now be seen as helping to end mass incarceration when they've all gotten huge tax breaks for stadiums and are not paying for schools, mental health, and all the other things that could have stopped some of the problems on the front end. The fact of the matter is that so much about how capitalist systems and capitalist structures, and particularly the ways that capitalism over the last 20 and 30 years have superseded democracy, and superseded democracy as a power, especially as black people have gained more access to the vote and political power. All of that is at the heart of how we think about a lot of things. But then how do you then do the work, right? How do then you have the resources to pay people? How do you keep yourself pure enough so you're not part of that? And I have all sorts of thoughts about that and all sorts of conversations with my executive coach and my therapist about where I think we are going right and when I think I have made a mistake and we've made a mistake. But all of this means that we have to constantly be paying attention to the fact that true structural change means that winning for the folks that have, whose communities and have been destroyed means that some folks will have to give up things, that some folks will lose. And anyone who tells you otherwise, that we can all win, is lying to you. And that's why I talk about power. And that's why I talk about political power, because far too often I go into rooms and people just want to talk about all the ideas for changing the system, like we can, nonprofit executive direct our way out of this problem. And we can't. And so part of how we have to build power, we've done a lot of things at Color of Change. We are the only national black civil rights organization that does not take corporate money. And there are like all sorts of moments where there are bills to pay and I'm like, someone's offering a check, but that is what we do. We don't take government money. We have to hold those institutions accountable, and we can't hold them accountable if we're taking their money. We simply can't. Corporations are designed to get you to do the things they want you to do, and if I am taking their money, then I am now designed to do the things that they want me to do. We think a lot about power through all of it. It doesn't mean we don't work on things that feel like incremental change, but we're constantly thinking about how do we win where the people are at the center of that effort. And so when I talk about the prosecutor work, which is tricky, right? As a 22, 23-year-old activist, I might be like, if I was like in the back of the room watching myself now with like my long locks and dashiki in the back of the room, I might be like wondering who the guy in the suit is talking about prosecutors, and might be a little afraid of what the road ahead looked like. But the strategy for us with the prosecutor's race, and I talk about a new type of political power, we focus all of our efforts not about raising a lot of money that we can give to the candidate or running a lot of ads on Facebook or TV. In fact, our effort is about expanding the number of black people who show up for these races. Basically, with a theory of change that 80% of prosecutors run unopposed, most of these races have deeply low voter turnout. And if we can focus on what the people in the civic engagement space call low propensity black voters, but we call high potential black voters, if we can focus on them, then we can force a new type of political base to have power that they never had before. So for me, it's constantly thinking about who's helping us move the needle forward? What are the strategies that are we propelling? And how are each of the choices we are making not simply designed to give us a win that we can sort of call a win, but give us the type of win that builds more power for the people who need it the most? Because when people that have been oppressed have power, what we have is a better opportunity to win more down the line, but also the ability to hold on to it. And someone's keeping time, right? Yeah, okay.
One more. Okay.
Hi, my name is Erin Locke. Building on the topic of economics and how we, I think, all agree that the prison industrial complex and how this is all driven on that. And recently, listening to the 1619 Project and how they were talking about at its peak, slavery and the value of one slave was approximately $10,000. I was wondering if there's been any research into looking at what the value of one incarcerated person is to the industrial complex, and how, if we can look at that and then look at all the people behind that and how we can take that down and really, if you could comment on that at all. So
yeah, there's been a lot of research. I'm not going to be off the top of my head, I'm not going to give you, but there's a lot of research and there's people in the room that's probably better to point you towards the best research, and there's certainly people oftentimes at Color of Change that are going to be better to point you towards the best vetted research. It's always important to know your lane. What I will say from a strategic campaign perspective, that yes, like that is part of the work, right? And it is both about like the corporate entities, right, of navigating, holding those institutions accountable that may be publicly traded, but it's also, quite frankly, the very risky stuff that an organization like mine has to do when we work on a wide range of issues, of sometimes having to run a campaign on the Congressional Black Caucus PAC for taking private prison money, right? Which we literally had to do. Or in 2016, having to go to the Clinton campaign and say, you know, we get the sort of scary moment you've created around Donald Trump, and it's a scary moment, but you have to give back that private prison money. And we go back and forth for a week, and the final week we send the Clinton campaign 2 emails, one with a smiley Hillary Clinton face that says she gave back the money, and one with an angry Hillary Clinton face that says she didn't give back the money, and we said, at the end of the week, we're going to send out one of these emails, and you let us know which one. They gave back the money, and we sent out the smiling Hillary Clinton email, and we moved forward, and this election, no Democrat is taking private prison money because a new standard was set. Doesn't mean that any private prisons closed because of that. Doesn't mean that black people have been released from private prisons. And so we always have to recognize what we've won and what we haven't won along the way. And that's the important thing about narrative and rules and norms, about setting context and then using that context to drive things forward. But you know, your point about sort of thinking about worth and value on the system, I think that that's important from a contextual space, right? And a space of like knowing how hard our opponents are willing to fight to keep things in place. But it's not just about the economic value. There are all sorts of political and power decisions being made as well about how populations and people are controlled that are also at play. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. The final thing that my campaigns team would be so annoyed if I didn't do, for folks who are not members of Color of Change, can you take out your phones right now? I'm gonna make it real easy. The only way that we walk out of this room more powerful is if we can move analysis to action, right? If we can move what we learn and what we do today to the ability to make something happen. So I want you to text the word color to the number 225568. I spend a lot of time doing black radio and doing this over and over again. So the word color to 225568. And please join us and let's make justice real together. Thank you. And that's color to 225568.
One more round of applause for Rashad. Brief moment of housekeeping. So there is food out in the narthex there. We have about 20 minutes for folk to get food and come back in here when Ryan is going to begin another really important presentation. If we can try to do this in somewhat of an orderly fashion of like maybe people in the front going out first and then sort of moving our way back and just watching for as people go through so we don't have a bottleneck in there. Everyone will get food. There's tons and tons of falafel and all sorts of things. Enjoy. We'll be back here in 20 minutes. Thank you very much.